Hi guys, Ronnie here and welcome to the workshop. Today I want to talk about a topic that is pretty popular with you, my viewers, and that is group set choice. Now, I have been putting the new Shimano 12-speed Dura Ace group set through its paces in the last couple of months. So today I want to talk a bit more about that, how it works, how happy I am with it, and what are the flaws, drawbacks, etc. So before I start, I'm pretty sure that there will be people who say that, oh, why do you need a 12-speed group set on a road bike? Why that? It's too expensive, etc. If you're one of those people, there's no point in watching after this because you will find the flaw anyway. If, however, you are deciding between one of the main competitors for this group set and this one, then I can tell you straight away that, in my opinion, this is the best choice currently on the market right now. Nothing really comes even close in terms of overall performance. So yeah, the choice is very straightforward. And I'm saying that having ridden basically all three main group sets in the past 2 years on my personal bikes, so that's important. I have personal experience with all three of them, so I can really vouch for this opinion. So, and of course I've also ridden the previous generation extensively and I compare to that directly, and well, at first the differences might be quite subtle, but there are some nice improvements to be made and there are some things that I'm really genuinely happy about. So let's just start straight with the front of the bike, as always. And the most distinct feature probably is the new brake lever design. Now, it's still very typical Shimano, so you have two buttons on both sides plus the extra programmable button here on the top. Now the top shape is a bit different and it's quite a bit bulkier in this instance, and it also has this nice little cover and at the brake pivot points it looks better. But those are just the aesthetics really. What is important for me is that this time it's really nice on the hands. So basically every other system apart from Campagnolo, I had problems with getting blisters from the rubber hoods, so that is no longer the case here. The shape is really comfortable, you have nice support, even in the wet. The new cover material is quite grippy, and I have many thousand kilometers on this already, and it shows no signs of wear, so that's also a good thing in my opinion. Obviously the big selling point or the big news is that the levers now communicate or can communicate wirelessly with the rear mech, and that is really the preferred way of setting up the bike. However, you can still wire it the old-fashioned way if you want that for some reason. So overall that's good. The levers are operated by coin cell batteries and they last a pretty long time. As I said, I have a couple thousand kilometers on them and the charge is still in the green, so that's good after almost half a year of use. Another big feature for me is the servo wave technology. So with this you have a much more positive lever feel and better braking action, which I think is on par now with Campagnolo. So I regarded those Campagnolo brakes as the best in class. However, I think it's pretty much the same now, with one exception at the caliper, because the new Shimano caliper has quite a bit more clearance than the Campy version, so that's also great. I've ridden, well, different versions of this Groupset on and off road, and basically it now eliminates brake rub in most situations. So unless something very extreme happens, the pads retract very quickly, very positively, so no sticky pads like before. So generally that's a big improvement as well. So to summarize this part a little bit, brake lever feel is great, much better modulation, braking action with a lot more pad clearance. However, I would like to point out that I had one catastrophic failure of a front brake caliper where the ceramic piston in the caliper broke for no apparent reason really, and I just found the bike that well, the morning I came into the workshop there was brake fluid all over the place, and yeah, it was just broken. But this was replaced under warranty, so no issues here. I think it must have been a manufacturing fault, and there have been no issues ever since. However, if you consider that this could have potentially happened during a ride or a descent, yeah, that's a bit sketchy. So yeah, other than that it worked fine. If I compare this to SRAM as well, I think SRAM has the poorest brake performance out of all these three, so with bad pad clearance and not great modulation. And also if you talk about noise, SRAM brakes tend to be really noisy and get contaminated and noisy pretty easily. With these that was not really the case, apart from the spill from the broken caliper. No matter which conditions I rode in, wet, dirty, as you can see, this bike has been ridden extensively in wet conditions, and even in full rain there's no whining, no squealing when you brake, even on the hard braking, so that's also a big plus. You get nice powerful silent brakes. I think a big part of that also comes down to the fact that the new rotors are used, so these are the MT900s. These are pretty good in terms of heat tolerance as well. There's no warping anymore, so no tinging and contacting the pads after a hard dose of braking, so that's also a big improvement over the previous version. Another thing that I really like is the new sprint shifters. Now I think these are designed the way that they should have always been like, so no bulky SWR9150 anymore. This is just a very neat solution, very minimalistic, fits nicely onto the bar, easy to install, no excessive cable length, and with Dura Ace at least you can use 2 pairs on both sides, so you get plenty of options there. One thing that has been criticized quite a lot with Shimano Di2 group sets is the fact that the 2 buttons or the shift lever blades that you shift with are, well, not so easy to distinguish between the two, particularly when riding in the gloves. And I think that has been improved slightly, but really it will never be like 2 completely separate shift buttons or pedals like with SRAM or Campagnolo. So in that regard there's not much in it. However, the latter part, or the one further back, is slightly larger now, and the front one is more textured. If this really bothers you, then you can of course program it different ways if you want a completely separate shift action. But yeah, since you can't really have, maybe it's patented for SRAM, I don't know, but you can't have a function where you press in both, so you can't really have it functioning that way, which would be the most logical way, I think. So yeah, that is certainly a drawback. However, the buttons now do have a pretty distinct feedback to them, so at least you know you've pressed it. And even I think the top button is now a lot more reachable. Since I'm using a Wahoo head unit, the menus here are pretty simple. So I've programmed it so the right lever just moves the page along, since I only have 2 or 3 pages maximum. Then I just swap between them, and I've programmed the left one to act as a function button. So this way I can make mid-ride adjustments. Since there's no junction box anymore, this option is otherwise not really accessible like it was when you had the bar and junction. But if you program it that way, which can be done, you can bring that back if you trade that for the page navigation option. However, as I said, if you only have 2 or 3 pages like I do, that's not really a problem. So that's pretty much all I can think of really about the brakes and the levers. One more thing perhaps, that the bleed process is extremely easy now, very much improved over the previous iteration. So you have nice separate closing bolts for the bleed valve, so that's a big plus. And also the orientation is a lot better, so it doesn't get in the way of the rear triangle. So it's just an easier process to do, and it can be done with the same tools as before. But I talk about this more in depth in my setup video, so you can watch that if you need help on this. Otherwise that's pretty much covered, I think. If you go to the middle of the bike where the front derailleur lives, now this also I think is a pretty big improvement over the previous generations. So firstly the derailleur is a lot smaller than before, and the motor moves a lot quicker, so this means that the shifts are a lot quicker as well. I have the 11-speed chainrings on there still, but they're Shimano Dura Ace as well, so these are possibly the best shifting chainrings I have encountered. So I only tend to use these when front shifting is involved on a bike. Obviously it can be used as one by, like I do on my time trial bike, works without any issues with different chainrings. So yeah, the front mech is definitely a highlight of this group set, particularly if you compare it to the other 2 competitors. So Campagnolo has pretty decent front shifting, so I didn't really have any issues with that. But SRAM, again, I think the SRAM front shifting is not really anywhere close to Shimano in terms of either reliability. Ezt hallani?
Nem baj.
So SRAM shifting unfortunately is not really on par or anywhere close when it comes to the precision and reliability and also speed of Shimano front shifting. So again, if we compare everything, then this is certainly a big win, particularly if you're racing, because there a drop chain or a missed front shift can mean getting dropped or not getting dropped. So that's a big plus. The shifting itself can also be widely adjusted to suit different chainring sizes and chainring options. I don't really like to use a big spread between the chainrings, so I'm using a 5339 standard chain set. Obviously the newer 12-speed variants come in 5440. I have yet to try that, but those are still not really available. One interesting thing is that the front mech doesn't have mechanical stops anymore. Everything is adjusted electronically via the app or via the function button. If you shift to different combinations, which I also show in my setup video. One thing I find slightly annoying with the upshifts is that, as with all electronic shifting, basically the front mech moves a bit too far outboard. This is done to, well, accelerate the shift itself, so it overshifts and then it comes back. However, I find that the overshift period of the upshift is really quite long, and you can hear that if you shift it up, you are dragging the chain on the plate of the front derailleur quite long. I would say it's at least maybe 5 to 7 seconds, so I don't really think that's necessary, and it's just adding drag and wear to the drivetrain. But really that's a minor issue. Regarding drop chains during shifting, I haven't experienced any or none whatsoever, so that's what you would expect from Shimano, I guess. It will be interesting to try it with the newer chainrings, of course, but yeah, I can't really comment on that just yet. One thing I do find slightly annoying is the little wire guide for the front mech. Now, even on this bike, this is a 28mm road tire, and the gap between the tire and this little wire tab or whatever you call it is a little bit too narrow. In fact, on the gravel bike I had to remove it altogether because it was contacting the tire, and I had to take the wire and zip tie it to the front chain catcher, and this way there's plenty of clearance. So I don't think that's a particularly well thought out design, but really that's a really minor thing. You can notice that I'm not running the Shimano cranks or the Holotech 2 standard. The reason being that I just need a precise and reliable power meter, and unfortunately Shimano just can't deliver on that front. And I also am not a particular fan of the bonded multi-shell aluminum design and the 24mm spindle. So what I'm using here is a Power2Max NG SL with a set of Rotor Altu carbon cranks. So I just prefer it that way, and I recommend all of my customers going for this group to choose a different, preferably a power meter crank option that has a spider based power meter, because these tend to work best. Particularly Power2Max is an excellent example, of course, and I also have good experience with Quark. So if I can give you a recommendation, then definitely go this way. Then another crucial part, since the Groupset is 12-speed, is the chain. Now, really, a chain is probably not the most interesting topic to talk about, but there are a few things I have noticed. So one thing is that, of course, there's independent testing that this chain is pretty damn efficient, so it's a good all-around race option, so that's nice to know. But also the fact that the wax coating that I use on them, so from Silca or the new generation of molten speed wax, these tend to last a pretty long time compared to the 11-speed chain, so that's pretty good in terms of longevity. Actually, because of this coating, I haven't managed to wear out the chain yet, so I think that's also a good sign. However, chains with these Sealtech coating don't tend to be extremely durable, but so far so good as far as I can tell. Yeah. Then if we talk about the internal parts that are not really visible, if you don't have the bike disassembled, there are just three basically, at least in this instance. So there's the battery. This has a very similar form factor and size to the previous one. The biggest difference is that it no longer has one connector for the SD50 wire. Instead it has three for the SD300 wires, which are, well, a lot thinner, and the connector is a lot smaller. So they're easier and more handy to work with. So the setup is extremely simple. There's one wire that goes from the rear mag to the battery. In my case, that's housed in the seat post, and another one that goes from the front mag to the battery, and that's pretty much it. So these two components are powered by this central battery. As for battery life, the previous generation Shimano Di2 group sets with a fully wired setup were notorious for the extremely long durability in terms of battery charge, and now that the system is wireless, that's not so great anymore. I wouldn't say it's bad, but it doesn't last as long as with the wired setup. But if that's a problem, then of course you can run the setup fully wired. There are two connectors in the levers for the SD300 wires, and there are different junction and cable length options, so you can wire up any bike as you want or prefer if you want to go down that route. As for the wireless connection between the rear mag and the levers, I never experienced any issues. Apart from, well, two extreme cases really exist. So when the bike is sitting stationary, the system will go to a standby mode. In order to wake it up, you need to press the button 3 or 4 times, any shift button, to wake it up. And this is not my personal experience, but I heard it from a rider, is that when they were climbing a very long climb, they spent all of it basically in the easiest gear, and they rode that way for so long that the shifter went into this sleep mode or standby mode, and then it was necessary to wake it up again, which in a race situation could be pretty inconvenient. However, this is a pretty extreme example maybe. And the second thing I've experienced is, or was, when, for a reason of, well, outside the scope of this video, I had to, for each ride, basically take out the seat post of this bike, disconnect the cables, and swap it back and forth between this bike and the time trial bike, because I didn't have the seat post wedge for both of them. And in this case, after these many disconnections, I found that during one ride, for some reason, I couldn't really point out why or how that happened, but it occurred to me that in that particular instance, the wireless connection did break occasionally, and I had to reset, unplug, and do stuff like that to make it work again out on the road. So I can't really tell you why it happened, but it did. So yeah, but since the bike is now assembled properly and is not being disassembled anymore, that has not occurred, so it had to do something with that. The system just doesn't like being plugged in and unplugged a lot, so every day basically. So maybe that's something to keep in mind if you're traveling a lot. I don't know, I just thought it's worth mentioning. Okay, and now for the big part, the rear shifting. Now the first and most obvious thing is that now we have 12 gears. Do we need 12 gears? No. Sometimes you're okay with using 5 or 6, but this is not really a thing of need. It's a thing of optimization and making the bike and the shifting more effective. Same as with cars. You know, 50 years ago there were cars with 3-speed automatic gearbox and they worked, but now they have 9 or 10 gears for increased efficiency, and same goes for the bikes. This enables you to spread out the cassette to a larger range and also keep nice and smooth jumps. In Dura Ace trim there are basically 2 cassette options only. It's the 1130 and the 1134. There's also the 1128 according to Shimano's website, but I've never really encountered that. It certainly isn't available at my local distributor, and I don't really see the point of that because the 1130 with 12 gears is extremely tight. So just losing out on those 2 extra teeth for that, I just don't see the point in it. So yeah, this is the racing cassette, I would say, or the flat terrain cassette for most people, and I just got on really well with it. As for the installation, it goes on a standard Hyperglide derailleur body. There have been no issues with creaking or the carriers breaking like with the 11-speed version, or the pins coming loose. Nothing like that really. Of course, I'm not saying that there's 40,000 kilometers on it, but so far it has been good. The 11-speed cassette was pretty noisy. I find this to be quite a bit quieter, so that's also a good thing. Might come also down to the chain design. And one thing that's very interesting about it, and no one really uses it other than Shimano, is the, well, they call it the Hyperglide Plus technology, which in translation means that, well, previously and with most other drivetrain designs, the upshifts on the cassette are nicely ramped, so you got shaping on the teeth which guides the chain up the cassette, but the downshifts, well, the rear mag just pulls the chain down and it just slams into the next gear. Here it's no longer the case. The downshifts are also guided. This first appeared on the 12-speed XTR mechanical group set, but it's present here as well. And if you talk about the speed and the precision of the shifts, after riding 11-speed a lot, 11-speed Shimano, I just found that, well, this can't really be improved. And then if you go to 12-speed, you then ride it for a while and you can feel that it's extremely good, very quick, very crisp. But it's not until you go back to 11-speed that you notice the difference in speed, or shift speed and quality, in my opinion, because yeah, I don't think that, again, anything really comes close to it. And I'm not saying this because I'm sponsored by Shimano, or this is not certainly a Shimano advert. It's just a matter of fact that it's the best out there. And again, if I compare it to the competitors, Campagnolo has very fast, very violent shifts in both directions. Not so smooth, not so controlled, but extremely fast and aggressive. SRAM is, well, maybe because of the wireless connection, but it tends to be pretty slow, but other than that it works fine. So really you can't go wrong with this, really. And that's also true for both cassette options, because on my other bike I have the 34 cassette on a gravel bike. The spread there, not so tight, but on gravel I don't mind, and the shifting there works as well, so the derailleur has no problem of cleaning that admittedly pretty big range. One thing I do like to use with the Shimano rear mags, and I think that's a very nice feature of them that others also don't have, is the fact that you have the option of the direct mount derailleur hanger. This is just much neater and stiffer, easier to change the wheel, etc. So, and it looks better, let's be honest, that also counts. So yeah, really can't go wrong with that. The charging is now located at the rear part of the rear mech. So there's this little plastic cover that goes up and you plug the charge cable on that. Again, one slight niggle that I have with this is that the charge cable could be quite a bit longer in my opinion to make it more practical. This one is 1.5 meters long. It could be 2.5 really, or 3 meters long, to be honest. I would find that to be more practical, but that's really a minor thing. You can always use an extension cord. Charging takes, I would say, 2 to 3 hours depending on the wattage of your adapter, of course, but yeah, can be done pretty quickly. Since the rear mech is wireless, it now also communicates with head units, so you can set up different shift screens and battery alerts, etc. Previously you needed to install a little Bluetooth and N+ connecting adapter. That's no longer the case, so no extra parts are needed. It's all built in, so that's a good upgrade as well. You can notice that I'm not using the stock derailleur cage just because I like these Aero ones by SLF. They're slightly more aerodynamic, and of course they use oversized pulleys and ceramic bearings, so there's a slight increase in efficiency. Some people like to debate that. I think it's just really physics. There's less chain articulation. However, the standard pulley cage is pretty long itself, again to accommodate the larger cassette. In Dura Ace it's made of carbon fiber, it uses sealed bearings, so that's pretty standard stuff compared to the old version, so nothing extraordinary is happening there. One thing I found that the cage tension is pretty low compared to the other group sets, and on one occasion, on a very bumpy descent in the tallest gear, I managed to dislodge the chain from the front chainrings, but even in this instance I managed to just shift it back on using the front mech, so no big deal really. It can happen and it's pretty easy to remedy. One thing that I did find a bit strange, and I think this is because of the Hyperglide technology, is that if you are in the big chainring and you are slightly cross-chained to the larger cogs on the cassette, then if you rotate the wheel backwards or you push the bike backwards, then the chain drops to a smaller cog. This can be quite impractical when you are doing a lot of starting and stopping and maneuvering around, perhaps at a cycling event. That's where I noticed it. So that's not very convenient, but in regular on-road use or race use this will never happen. Of course this is no mountain bike, so yeah, again, very small niggle, just thought that it's worth mentioning. So yeah, I think overall, really, if you consider all of these factors and the improvements, then really if you're going for a bike or just a group set from one of these top tier options, then really it's a no-brainer. There's one other side to it, because it's Shimano. Well, Shimano is everywhere, in every bike shop, at every event basically, so it has a lot of support, easy to source the parts, so that's definitely a plus side of it. The downside is that Shimano is everywhere, so if you want something unique, then this is probably not up your street because everyone has it. So I think on that I will conclude this review. So far I'm really happy with the group set, apart from these small mishaps, but there are a lot smaller than I think than the competitors do have, so really, for me, it's a big recommendation for this one, and I will certainly keep you updated about how it performs in the even longer run. And I also have the Ultegra version now on my gravel bike, so I can also report and compare the two in the future. So if you'd like to see more of that, then of course stay tuned and subscribe to the channel. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Okay, that's probably enough.